In this video, we're reviewing Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and cutting our strings with a sweet and chocolatey cocktail called the Marionette. Today, on the Martini Shot. Hello and welcome to the Martini Shot, the home of movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails. Before we get into the review, let's whip ourselves up a drink. Not to spoil my thoughts on this movie, but yeah, this is going to be a stiff one. The Marionette is inspired by the puppet of the same name from the film and will include a lot of his color palette to the best of our ability. It will be dark and heavy, but nice and sweet with this mixture of chocolate and raspberry while also having a nice frothy body thanks to an egg white. No strings attached to this cocktail. Let's get into it. This will be a shaken cocktail, so go ahead and grab yourself a cocktail shaker. Let's first start by sweetening up the drink with a little bit of maple syrup at half an ounce. And now we can go straight into our alcoholic ingredients, first starting with a little bit of creme de cacao at 1/4 ounce, half an ounce of raspberry liqueur, I'll be using Chambord, and then finally 1.5 ounces of dark rum. And like I said, we're gonna be giving this cocktail a nice frothy body with the addition of 1 egg white. And then finally, and this isn't really required, but I'm gonna be adding just a pinch of black sanding sugar. It's totally not needed. I'm only really using it to try to get it closer to that shade of black that we're looking for. But because it is sugar, it will sweeten up the cocktail just a tad, but not to a point where I think it's super noticeable. Once that's done, first we're going to dry shake the cocktail. That just means we are going to shake it without ice. This is going to let that egg white aerate and emulsify, which is going to give it the nice frothy texture we're looking for. And then once you've done that for about 15 seconds, you can go ahead and throw some ice in your shaker and shake to chill. Once you're done, you can go ahead and strain that into a chilled coupe glass and give it a minute to sit just so it can develop that nice frothy head that we're looking for. And once that's done, you can go ahead and garnish it with 2 cherries. That's going to represent the red cheeks of the Marionette. And there you go, now you have the Marionette. I mean, the flavor blend of the chocolate and the raspberry is not surprisingly very, very good. And the maple syrup also works in harmony very, very well, sweetening it up, but also giving it this nice richness. And because a lot of these flavors are pretty heavy and it is a very alcohol-forward cocktail, I think the egg white is definitely the way to go to lighten it up a little bit, making it a little less punchy and a little bit more sippable. And I think if you manage to get everything just right, I think the color palette of the black, the white, and the red works out really, really well, makes it very striking. I always enjoy doing character-inspired cocktails like this, even if the movie isn't exactly to my taste. But the cocktail certainly is, and I have a feeling I'm probably gonna need the entire thing for this review. So now that we have our drink, let's get right into the review. People have asked me,
Brandon, why do you bother reviewing movies you know you don't think you're going to like?
Well, honestly, there can be a few reasons. I could want to support a specific actor or director, the premise could intrigue me, or I could have just a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, it'll learn from prior films, looking at what works and what doesn't, and try something different in order to perfectly bring that idea to life. None of this applies to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, I just thought I'd give you a little insight. But why would you try something new with this franchise? The first one became Blumhouse's highest grossing film ever, despite reeling in fairly negative reviews from critics. But that's not who Blumhouse is interested in, it's the fans. The ones who will show up no matter what to see their favorite characters on screen. And if that's how you choose to engage with these films, then by all means, continue to do so. You probably won't care much about my opinion, but as someone who is fairly familiar with these games and the lore surrounding them, I think you can set your standards just a little bit higher. Every issue I had with the prior film returns in spades in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which forgoes trying to be a horror movie and instead tries to be a gigantic lore dump, overstuffed with as many nods and winks to the video game franchise as possible. Because of this, the movie finds very little meaningful things for our main characters to do. Meanwhile, the second film seems to strip most, if not all, attempts at being scary with far weaker jump scares and overall atmosphere this go around. It reeks of a film willing to get by on fan loyalty, thinking it'll be seen because of brand recognition while giving you not a single meaningful memory to take home with you. So, without an intriguing story, characters, or scares, I struggle to see any reason why someone would care to watch this. Picking up after the first film, Mike, Vanessa, and Abby are all just trying to move on with their lives. Well, maybe not Abby, because she finds herself missing her animatronic ghost friends, so much so that she is pulled towards the very first Five Nights at Freddy's location, where a whole new threat is starting to take shape. The characters are more or less what they were in the first film. Kid with a connection to the paranormal, lore machine included to explain every little thing, and guy. It doesn't really use the events of the first movie to push towards any meaningful development, even though we're told time and time again how much stress everyone is under. Abby is obviously the core of the film, wishing to reunite with the animatronics, but the film doesn't do anything deeper with that. She shows the ability to make real, living friends at the beginning of the movie, so her sadness over not being able to see her dead ones just feels a little odd. This could have been used as a tool to inscribe some message about making peace with your grief and moving forward, but there's not even an attempt to try to say anything here. The only real new characters of note are the new animatronics. Same as the last film, they look incredible. Genuinely impressive one-to-one recreations from the games. They aren't exactly scary, but the first film didn't even really try to convince you of that anyway. I do like the imagery and use of the Marionette, who is kind of the de facto villain of the film. There's actually some really cool effects and makeup that comes from it possessing people, which is probably the closest this movie ever feels to a horror movie. There's even some halfway decent motivation for the villain this time around, being a lot more vengeful than just the mindless evil from the first film. It's not all that compelling and eventually leads to nothing, but it's as close to a compliment as I can give this. Despite how cool it might be to see these characters brought to the screen, the plot just ends up being a jumbled mess and a slog to get through. It's nothing but exposition, conveniences, and little nods to the franchise that don't amount to anything worthwhile. The plot just feels like something to rush through so we can get to more Easter eggs rather than something that had much thought put into it. I get having to extend your disbelief for movies like this, but the film takes its time to throw out new rules that it doesn't even seem content with sticking to. For instance, Abby is drawn to the old location by a speech machine she finds at the place from the first film. The ghost at the old location uses it to communicate with her and trick her into coming to the old location, but the film makes it pretty clear the ghost's influence can't reach outside the location without the help of Abby. Like, I guess they could have built up Abby's connection to the dead that could explain that, but it just feels like haphazard convenience to move the plot forward. And aside from plot issues, the rest of the writing is just so bland and unremarkable. There's no charm or sense of humor to it, with every attempt at being heartfelt or funny falling completely flat. It reads like a first draft, which I wouldn't doubt it is, because you just know it isn't an interesting story reeling people in. Weak story and convoluted lore can be more easily forgiven in a video game because it's the interactivity that you're there for. You can fill the gaps in with your own mind and interpretations because it's easier to insert yourself into what's happening. When you try to translate that directly to film, it just doesn't work. There's a scene essentially recreating the game mechanics from the first, and it's the biggest example of what I'm talking about. The translation of this from game to screen ends up being laughable and misguided, not even attempting to capture the same scares of the game and instead making it a fun little nod for fans. Yeah, like I said, the horror is pretty much non-existent. These games aren't exactly known for gore or heavy violence. They build their scares with tension and surprise. But every jump scare in this is highly telegraphed or just poorly set up. And the only thing about them that will make you jump is the loud-ass sound effects played alongside them. I'm struggling to even find anything new to add to this critique because it just repeats every issue I had with the first film. It didn't even try to improve upon itself because it made all its money back by appealing to the people that just want to see recognizable characters on the big screen. I'm not even a huge Five Nights at Freddy's fan, but this feels like a huge disservice to the fan base. Maybe I'm out of touch and fans have moved away from the horror and focused more on the ever-expanding lore and the colorful characters, but nothing about what made those games appealing, at least to me, is present here. The film knows it isn't trying to win you over. It's already got you here. That's why it's content on giving you a half-baked story that feels purposefully incomplete in order to sequel bait you, scares that don't actually try to frighten you, and enough jingly keys to keep your attention because it thinks you'll equate recognizing with enjoyment. Did people enjoy the original video game because it had recognizable characters and winks and nods to itself? Hell no, but the film seems to think that's all you really want without realizing what made it popular to begin with. At the end of the day, if you take away all the IP stuff and leave it to survive on the merits of its story, its characters, and its horror, this thing wouldn't make it out of the deepest depths of Tubi. I can't say I'm disappointed because my hopes for this were already underground, but if you're a fan of the games or even the first film, I sure as shit would be. For my rating, I'm giving this film 1.5 music boxes out of 5. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Martini Shot. If you saw Five Nights at Freddy's 2, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. And if you like what you saw here and would like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me across all social media channels. Those links are down in the description below. And if you enjoy movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails, be sure to check out my website, martinishot.blog. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly.